Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Darcy Meals. I am the Deputy Director of the Center for Access to Justice and the Director of Public Interest Programs at Georgia State's Law School. We are delighted to have you here today for Minding the Justice Gap, which is a class series that we're putting on in conjunction with the Administrative Office of the Courts here in Georgia. This is the second class, which is entitled Legal Advice versus Legal Information. And we have a host of great panelists here that are true experts on this issue, and we're excited to hear from them. I'm going to turn it over to Judge Tabitha Ponder with the Access to Justice Committee to kick us off.
Thanks, Darcy, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for joining us in our second class. I do wear several hats today. I am staffing the Access to Justice Committee, and that's with our Judicial Council here in Georgia. I'm also a part-time judge in Cobb County. Steve, we're going to be chatting about the unauthorized practice of law. So will you kick it off and just tell us what you do day to day?
Okay, certainly. My name is Steve Kaczkowski. I'm the Unlicensed Practice of Law Counsel here at the State Bar of Georgia. And we've got a department that is devoted to this activity. Basically, we've got 3 investigators, 2 attorneys, including myself and a secretary, and we handle all sorts of complaints and inquiries related to the unlicensed practice of law in Georgia. What is it? How does it apply to me? I think something's fishy in my area. What do I do? Am I talking to the right person, et cetera? And just, we do have a centerpiece for the unlicensed practice of law as far as what it is in Georgia. It's Georgia Code Section 15-19-50 and the sections that follow. And just real briefly, so I don't go on forever, 15-19-50 sets out a list, it defines the practice of law. It's a very expansive definition. And 15-19-51 sets out a list of proscribed activity, the activity that's criminal to engage in if you don't have the proper license. So that's kind of the short end of it. And we get about a couple hundred complaints a year, and anything from disbarred lawyers who just won't stop and keep representing people in the courtroom after they know they've been disbarred, to people that were just trying to help maybe a relative and just didn't know what the rules were. So within that, we try to really educate people and take corrective action when necessary. And that's about it.
All right, and Steve, when we met a few years ago, we were preparing a form, which is we call it a counter card. And it was the unauthorized practice of law counter card. And it will actually, you all will be able to view this on the resources page. You'll see a link there, so you can go and check it out. We created the card together to assist some of our staff at the legal self-help centers, as well as clerks. So tell the audience why you decided to help us with the project.
Well, there was a huge, and I don't really probably have to tell any of you this, there's a huge demand for unmet legal needs. Regardless of what anyone else does, there's a vast pool of individuals who maybe don't have the money for an attorney, but there's no case bigger than your case. So everyone's got the biggest case on earth, their case. Right. They need help. And some people can't hire a lawyer, et cetera. But other people, they know, to their credit, they have to take action, and they're not playing they don't place the whole thing on the pay no mind list and let it get worse. But they'll sometimes appear at a courthouse and say, look, I got this summons. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? Mm-hmm. And in the spirit of, hey, look, everybody wants to help and do their jobs and give the most information that's of use to people. But we are very mindful of the whole axiom, no good deed goes unpunished. And if you're at a courthouse and you do too much, the finger of blame could be pointed at you. So that's really kind of why we were involved with the counter card and other things, is because we want people to get access, and we want people to have great representation relative to their case and feel like they got a fair shake in court. They got their day in court. Well, and one way to do that is to make freely available information available to those individuals, and maybe in a more concentrated form in a package or some kind of means of delivery that's going to be of immediate use to them.
Thank you, Steve. So let's talk a bit about some scenarios, and let's as to whether or not they do or do not rise to the unauthorized practice of law. So a patron walks into a clerk's office and asks for a form that she can fill out herself to get a divorce. Is it okay for the clerk to give her the form?
Sure. And I would expand on that and say that I think the best results that we see are that when, say, the judges in a particular circuit, and to use the divorce scenario, so we're talking about superior courts, so courts have the inherent authority to kind of police their activities, and they're for efficiency and the free flow of information and betterment of justice and all that. And part of that can be the judges could get all on the same page and say, look, in our courtroom, these general formats are going to be fine. Just like in a statute, you can see the form that's sometimes in with the statute. And it usually works very well when the judges have a packet and they say, hey, look, if anyone walks in here, they say to the court staff, they want a divorce packet, we've got, or they're asking about divorce information, we've got packets that we've created and we're fine with the information contained therein. Feel free to give them a packet, which, and that way nobody has to get out over their skis and give verbal information and wing it. It's all kind of structured under the auspices of, in this case, in this instance, the court.
Gotcha. That's a great idea. Now, if a legal navigator offered advice, we're just stick with the divorce case, and offered advice about which county to file the complaint for divorce in, would that be considered unauthorized practicing?
Yeah, and as you just touched upon, this stuff is extremely fact dependent. So I'll give you the basic dividing line, but then it'll be up to each individual to kind of take that and run with it, make the best call possible. Basic division is legal information, legal advice. And legal information, hey, everyone has a First Amendment right in this country to put forth truthful, factual information and to provide that to others. And you can't, as a citizen, you got the right to do all that. The advice is when you come out of the general information and you give particularized information or particularized view or argument related to that specific instance of fact and circumstance, that matrix that someone's in with relative to their case. So on the one hand, using your example, information, where do I file it? Where would I even file this? Well, normally a petition's filed in the county where the defendant resides. Okay, that general principle is fine to articulate, but when someone say, hey, what do I do? Or when that's coming into play relative to their specific matter, you ought to get at least a little intuitive, oh, I might be getting a little too far out there. That's not my place to really walk out there with them and talk about the specifics of their action. So that's the broad dividing line. And it's very fact dependent. Everybody has to make a good call. Just to let you know, just to round it out, if we receive an inquiry about court, say a court employee who's in a situation where they help someone, and we're not looking to kick in someone's door and get someone in trouble. We're looking to kind of reinforce what I just talked about and help people deliver their information and do a good job for the court that employs them, but also not to go over the line into 1951 and that proscribed activity.
Okay, and so with regards to, let's say, a probate case, someone comes into a legal self-help center, and I know you've heard of the Doherty County Self-Help Center, and I do want to hear your thoughts on those kind of centers and the way that's set up and your opinion about that. But let's take a probate case. Someone comes into the self-help center asking for assistance to settle a title. Can the staff person or the legal navigator, who is not a lawyer, give the person the correct forms?
Well, I would say, and this is my opinion, is that it can be done so long as it is done properly. And what do I mean by that? Basically, the Supreme Court of Georgia, by court rule, has set up Part 14 of the bar rules under which we, the Unlicensed Practice Law Department, operate. And I think that the definitional section there it gives us a clue as to what a good kind of result would be here, or course of action. The court says the unlicensed practice of law shall mean the practice of law as prohibited by statute, court rule, and case law in the state of Georgia. Okay, well, let's flip it around. Okay, all the stuff that's prohibited by, for instance, court rule, fine. But in your probate case, what if the probate, and once again, I say peg all this to some kind of authority. If the probate judge or judges, someone in a position of authority has like a packet of information, and I'm just going to kind of go back to that, because if the court just issues a local rule that's consistent with all others, in this case, probate rules, but says we find that certain people come in, they're appointed representatives, they're looking to find out what to do. The navigators we find that these navigators that can guide people through the legal system are of great benefit to this court. We're going to allow this certain activity. And it can be very general. Like, for instance, we find the need to work up a packet of information regarding probate for people who are newly appointed as representatives and in whatever capacity, and we want the navigators to give this to them and answer any related questions. You could say it very generally, in which case the court has authorized that activity. And so I would say if that's all done like that, it's all above board and it's going to be helpful and legal.
Okay. And Steve, what is your take on a center that's set up similar to Dougherty County, the Self-Help Center, the way it's structured with a lawyer present? I know there are some centers that may not have lawyers present, but what is your take on that center and the way it's set up and how they've been assisting citizens?
Well, I think it's wonderful. And just so all viewers of this we're all on the same page, you, me, Tabitha, and everyone. You know, there have been some self-help centers, and for instance, you mentioned one where there's a lawyer on staff, and maybe for a nominal fee, they can talk to one of the litigants who is trying to handle their own case, their own. I think these are great programs because, and we saw a family law center in DeKalb County as well, where there's someone on staff, and this is, I'll just, in its broadest sense, I'll liken it to the old phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I realized money short and it's all this stuff really tends to revolve around funding, but in the abstract, what works best for someone, let's say we have 20 people who have cases and they ask questions at the front end and they more or less get things smoothed out so that when they have their day or days in court, it's all kind of flows and the issues get hammered out. Or do we just kind of hover around, let people hang around the courthouse, talk to God knows who, and some of these people show up and they have no clue because maybe they talked to another litigant who just told them stuff that was totally way off base. My point being, you can front load a little bit of good, solid analysis, and you can kind of take your temperature once in a while. How am I doing in this case? And then you can say, well, look, this is way beyond me. Maybe I do need a lawyer. I'll figure something. I need to get a lawyer. But you can figure all that as you go. The worst case is you show up the day of your trial, you haven't done anything, you don't know what's going on. Well, then the system just stops. Everything grinds to a halt. And then the other cases on that calendar are delayed. And then you often have to reset it and start at square one relative to that litigant. It's all wasted time. You could do so much more by kind of managing these people, and you can manage expectations too. And people just don't show up at the courthouse then on their court day and say, and it's like a Kafka-esque scenario today. No, bring people in, help them educate themselves as they go and help people speak for themselves. And I think that that's the way to go. As long as the powers that be in that circuit, that jurisdiction are for it, we've had great results.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It looks like we are out of time for this part of the session. And we appreciate all of your help with this. And so I do want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A and we will have someone monitoring those questions and we'll definitely try to get an answer for you. So now I'll hand it over to you, Danielle.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all for watching. My name is Danielle Hirsch. I work at the National Center for State Courts, and I'm going to be the moderator today. We have three fantastic guests, one of whom is on another panel and racing to join us. So she will introduce herself and join us when she can. But we have Stacy Weiler and Mary McClymont who are here now. And so before we get into the substance of navigators and what they've done across the country with a spotlight on what's happening in Illinois and New Mexico, I want to make sure that you get a taste of what marvelous panelists you have. So starting with Mary, can you tell us about yourself and how you got to the work of studying navigators?
Thank you very much, Danielle. It's great to be with everybody today. I am a senior fellow now at the Georgetown Law Justice Lab. And how I got into this whole area was by really working in philanthropy for many years. I'm a lawyer, of course, but I was working in philanthropy, and we were supporting programs that were trying to help make reforms in the civil justice space to bring improvements. And when I left there in 2018, I had the good fortune to join up with some colleagues at Georgetown. And we thought that one of the fine solutions that's out there in the civil justice space, one that might be simple and straightforward, is the one I think we're discussing today. And that is non-lawyer navigators, especially in the state courts, given, as Steve and Tabitha were saying, the huge numbers of self-represented people in our state courts. And we know that navigators are used in a lot of other spaces. They're used in administrative proceedings, especially in the federal arena and the like. So what was going on, we questioned ourselves, in the state court area? Who's doing what? And we decided to undertake a survey of what's going on across the country. We were mainly looking at non-lawyer navigator programs that are providing civil legal assistance in the state courts on basic matters. And really what our study tried to do is offer up, based on everything our informants told us, we were just asking them their views because they were working in programs, they were developing programs. We asked them, what are the characteristics that would be useful in a navigator program? What do you do? Similarly, we were asking them for their practical considerations. So we found programs in 15 states across our country. So we'll talk more about this as we go forward, but that's the basic thing that I'll be referring to, this study we did. So I'm very keen that Georgia is now undertaking this effort like many states across the country. Thanks.
Marvelous. I think we can all see why Mary is on the panel. Okay, Stacy, you're up next.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks for having me. My name is Stacy Weiler. I work with the Illinois Bar Foundation, and I started working with courthouse navigator programs. I had the pleasure of working with Danielle in a past life when she piloted Illinois Justice Corps at the Chicago Bar Foundation. And when the CBF secured AmeriCorps funding, I was brought on to help kind of manage this AmeriCorps program. And since, we have grown from 3 little courthouse volunteers to being a statewide program in 12 courthouses around Illinois. So I've had the pleasure of taking the program from its very beginning AmeriCorps roots to being a statewide program that I think a lot of other programs are hearing about and using as a model for how they can launch successful navigator programs.
Wonderful. And just to give you a preview of Paula, who will join us when she's able, she works with the Administrative Office of the New Mexico courts doing language access and court services. And they've piloted a really interesting scribe program in a couple of courts in New Mexico. So I'll let her speak more when she gets here, but let's talk terminology a little bit. We're using the word navigator and non-lawyer navigator, but there can be lots of different flavors of navigator. So when I say the word navigator, what does that mean to you? And specifically, how have navigators worked across the country? So Stacy, let's start with you. Illinois Justice Corps, what do navigators do?
Sure. So our AmeriCorps members or courthouse navigators serve as docents. They work in various capacities in courthouses. It changes based on the needs of that particular courthouse, but in general, they're providing legal information and procedural guidance to people without lawyers as they attempt to address their civil legal needs. So that can look like physically helping them navigate a busy courthouse, getting to the correct courtroom or finding the clerk's office. It can look like helping them identify the correct forms or using online resources that are available to them to learn more about their legal issue. It can involve helping move through the various steps of their legal case. So that might be e-filing or visiting a clerk's office or understanding what their court order is asking them to do. And as I mentioned, it sort of changes. We work with our partners in each courthouse to see where our members can be best stationed in the courthouse to be able to provide the best services needed.
Wonderful. Okay, Mary, there are lots of different navigator programs that you successfully kind of charted out in your research at Georgetown, but can you give us some of the national trends? Do they cluster around different kinds of meanings, or is there a single meaning that you can use about navigators?
Yeah, I would say, Danielle, that navigators, we had defined them as sort of people who come in from outside the court to help court staff navigate the system and help self-represented people. And they may be AmeriCorps members, as in Stacy's great program and your pilot program. They may be college students, graduate students, retirees of various stripes. And I would say that of the programs we found, and it gives you a sampling, about half of them actually were based in a self-help center, like was being described about the Dougherty County, which is a great program. And that is a program that appeared in our study as well. Anyway, these are supervised often and run by the courts, and they bring in navigators, and court staff often oversee these programs. But similarly, there are other programs that have been given court authority, that have been given court approval, I should say, that are nonprofit groups, legal aid groups that use staff and may use volunteers as well. And they may work on one case type and help people on one case type. And in these self-help centers, as we all know, there's a variety of case types that are helped. So I'd say those would be some of the ways we think about these programs. It can be in a self-help center, or it can be otherwise. But I think Stacy hit on a lot of the things that these navigators are doing. It's not one size fits all. They're all doing different kinds of things. I think besides the points that Stacy made, increasingly we're seeing navigators help with remote services, and I'm sure Stacy will talk more about that, but especially with COVID and all, and they help people complete their forms. They help people with language assistance, and sometimes the navigators can go into the court simply to be there to help a self-represented person who doesn't know what's going on, and to just sit there with them, give them emotional support and the like. And of course, this is all under the auspices of supervision. So those are some samplings of the kinds of programs we were finding.
Wonderful. Okay, it's a little bit gauche, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about money. So in order to run a navigator program, it's very rarely going to be costless. I can't actually think of a costless program in terms of training and supervising and getting people started, as we'll discuss in a bit. But in order to have a program that ensures that people understand the differences between information advice, know what good referrals can be, et cetera. And so I'm curious how navigator efforts have been funded. When Paula joins, we'll have both an example of a pilot program that launched to be a proof of concept, and with Stacy, a much more robust statewide program, which is leveraging AmeriCorps dollars, which is a new source of funding, at least for that kind of work in the state of Illinois. And Mary, I'm sure there are lots of other examples, but let's start, Stacy, with Illinois Justice Corps. If you could talk a little bit about how you've successfully received and then grown AmeriCorps funding, and generally how else you fund the program.
Sure. So Illinois Justice Corps is an AmeriCorps program, which means that we receive an AmeriCorps grant from the federal government. So it comes with all the strings and obligations and regulations that are tied with federal dollars. I'm sure courts and court staff are familiar with things like that. And there's a matching requirement. So AmeriCorps is, you can leverage those funds, but they also expect you to be investing resources in order to match the amount of money that you're getting as a grant from the government. So we're very lucky to have the support of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Access to Justice. So Illinois Justice Corps is one of several key programmatic objectives that have been factored into our Access to Justice Commission's budget, which has been really instrumental in allowing the program to grow and expand to be statewide. So we sort of leverage funds from partner agencies like the Illinois Bar Foundation, the Chicago Bar Foundation, and the Commission in order to continually build up that AmeriCorps grant and get more resources in terms of numbers of AmeriCorps members who we can use. That helps pay for staffing and training needs and travel needs. And really and not only do they provide that funding, but AmeriCorps sort of requires that you be thinking about what you're going to need in order to make a successful program. So they want to see an adequate budget for everything that might be necessary to make a program successful. So we sort of have the opportunity to sit back and think about what we're going to need to make the program work and factor that in to our budget. And then we've been very fortunate to have the support of our Supreme Court and the Commission on Access to Justice that continually helps fund that and give us a little bit of planning time too, by kind of helping us know that we've got funding for a certain amount of time so we can continue to plan and grow. And AmeriCorps funding, there's a lot of tips and tricks, and I'm happy to, my contact information is available. If anyone's interested in applying for AmeriCorps funds, I'm always happy to talk to folks. There's definitely, it's not as necessarily an easy process, but it's certainly doable. And I think Mary will probably echo me in that I think it's a really fantastic source of funding for programs like these, especially if you're looking to engage young people who might be looking for short-term experiences in the courthouse, which we find to be a really successful way to make our program successful.
All right, Mary, can you give us examples of how other courts or bars or others who are leading court-based non-legal navigator programs, how they fund them or make them work?
Sure, Danielle. Well, first of all, as you can see, Stacy is the go-to if you need to know about how to find funding for AmeriCorps, the great work that's gone on in Illinois, which is statewide, as she explains, and similarly in California, great leadership there as well on getting AmeriCorps money. But we are seeing more and more states picking up the mantle and really trying to seek out these AmeriCorps dollars. There are myriad other federal funding sources that these programs we talk to use. It may be VAWA, the Victim Against Women's Act, various other federal resources. But surprisingly, we were thrilled to see in our study that people have been very creative about seeking funding. Some have gone out literally and gotten money, not only from their legislature, but from their mayor's office, if it's in a particular city. Some of these programs have gone and found money from private foundations in the area where they are based. Others have gone, as Danielle alluded, to state bar foundations, and sometimes they have made money available, as have the IOLTA programs in different states. And of course, in certain instances, the courts themselves have offered up resources. So I think the key message is we found a variety of resources, and it's all available to you in this study we did, and that Stacy can help you with on so many aspects of AmeriCorps, and others could also, I think, if will help you reach out to others to figure out ways to go after funding of various types. So it's possible, especially if you're starting, to state the obvious, with a pilot program. You can find this kind of funding.
Wonderful. I want to quickly take a pause to say I have the Q&A box open. If you have specific questions, please feel free to put them in there. I will monitor it and happy to ask our panel any follow-up questions that would be particularly helpful to any of you. But we're going to keep marching on. Okay, so you've figured out the funding to at least get it going. Now let's talk about how you actually operationalize such a program. And so I'm curious a couple of things. If you can talk about supervision of whoever are going to serve as navigators, both in terms of kind of the ecosystem, the kind of work they're going to do, whether it's helping with tech for remote hearings, whether it's providing legal information about what's going to happen, help with finding legal forms, et cetera. So what kind of training is in place? Who does the supervision? And so, Stacy, maybe start with, in Illinois, if you could pick like a a big court that has an anchor fellow and a scrappy, more rural court that doesn't, how it's done?
Sure. So we start with the distinction about legal information and legal advice, even in the interview stage for folks who are going to be participating in our program. It's something we start talking about when we're asking them questions about the type of experience they're looking for and what limitations they might have when they're providing direct services to people without lawyers. And then we do a lot of training before folks are even getting started in their courthouses. So everyone gets an orientation, and we have the benefit of, in Illinois, there's what we call the safe harbor policy. So we really use that as our starting point to help provide really clear guidance about what is not allowable, so what folks can't do, but more importantly, what they can do. So we do a lot of training around how to provide good substantive assistance without crossing over into the unauthorized practice of law. So doing some training and doing examples and doing role playing so that folks can reframe the question. I think Steve even mentioned, you know, when someone's asking a question, learning how to say, you know, I can't tell you specifically what to do, but in general, here are the rules about where you might file a legal case, or here's where you can find information about that. Or most people, you know, will use a motion form to ask the judge for what they're looking for. So you can decide what you'd like to ask the judge for using this form, you know, really helping them kind of think about how they can be helpful without crossing over into legal advice. And our program is designed, Danielle mentioned, we generally have what's called an anchor member. So we have a full or half-time, stereotypically a young person who might be taking a gap year. So most often it's a recent college graduate who's thinking about law school. And I will tell you, we definitely use the, hey, if you ever want to be a lawyer, the best thing to make it so you can't be a lawyer is to in the unauthorized practice of law before you're a lawyer. But we have these folks that we spend a lot of time with, and we've got really regular check-ins with them and regular training opportunities throughout their service year. So we've got, you know, these anchor, we call them our fellows, our Illinois Justice Corps fellows in each courthouse. So a middle of Illinois courthouse, like in Bloomington Normal, will have a full-time AmeriCorps member, and then we might also have student volunteers. And so every courthouse, no matter where you are in Illinois, has an identified site supervisor. So we have someone identified, usually on court staff. So, and it's no one size fits all. Sometimes it's the law librarian, sometimes it's a clerk, sometimes it's the trial admin. We really try to work with the community to find who the best person is to fill that role, to make sure that there's someone on site in person that can be providing some of that oversight. But for those fellows, they're also getting a weekly check-in with our program staff. So folks who are specifically, you know, on staff of Illinois Justice Corps. And so they're really checking in and they're asking, well, what's an example of an interaction with a court patron? And did you have any questions? Did anything come up? And we do the same training with the students, the part-time volunteers. We also provide those fellows with some training. It's a leadership training opportunity for them and some professional development. So we give them some tools about giving short-term feedback. We say, hey, if this student sounds like maybe they're getting close to that line because you're the one that's there all the time, you're getting a lot more practice. Here's a good way to intercede and to check them and say, hey, here's what you might try next time. And we're checking in with them to make sure we identify any potential problems early on. But for the most part, we really find that we put a lot into checking in, and we really don't hear a lot of feedback from folks being concerned about legal advice being provided by our members. They're well trained in knowing what resources are available, how to make sure that folks have every, potential piece of information or self-help resource so that they can make an informed choice on their own, so that they can move forward and be empowered to make that informed decision. I hope that addressed what you were looking for.
That's great. So Mary, curious again, sorry to make you represent 49 other states and territories, but how are other programs supervised?
Sure. I mean, I think that the lesson I learned early on in our study came right from Danielle Hirsch when she said to me, Mary, when you're going to set up a navigator program, for heaven's sake, set up a safe harbor policy in the state, because that gives everybody so much more comfort. And many states around the country have this now. And that is simply, and of course, Stacy alluded to it, and I was thinking about it as Steve was talking. It says what people can and cannot do if they're not lawyers, if they are court staff, if they're clerks, if they're volunteers. And again, many samples of this, and maybe Georgia has one, but it gives comfort to everyone, from the SRL, the self-represented person, to the judge in the court, to the navigator supervisor. And what we found with training materials is there in these programs we were studying, the 23 in the 15 states, everybody's onto it. They've got cards that talk about what people can and cannot do as navigators. There are waiver forms, there are disclosure forms, there are do and do not cards, reminders everywhere about what is possible and what should be done in training. So you wouldn't be alone if you're setting up one of these navigator programs, because there's a lot of great materials. I think on the training, it's very much what Stacy was saying. Everybody said to us, you've got to do shadowing and you've got to do on-the-job training. Of course, all this initial set of activities that Stacy was describing. But in addition, you need that ongoing training, the shadowing, and you need the follow-up training for these individuals. I guess I'd say with respect more directly, Danielle, to supervision, is that most of the programs we studied did have dedicated supervision. But let's remember, it doesn't, as we found, in half of the programs, the supervisors were lawyers. In the other half, they were court personnel. These are individuals who are experts, the clerks, the people in the self-help centers who are operating, and the experienced non-profit staff. You can find a way to supervise people. And I would add to that, people, as Danielle alluded, in these remote settings. Now we're seeing programs that are doing it remotely. They're using Zoom and the like. And of course, they have people online with them, because you can go into a breakout room on Zoom and ask your supervisor, what do I do now? And come back. So it's just to say that these programs have found ways to make sure they stay on track and keep it to legal information, even as they're undertaking pretty extensive training and supervision throughout the program.
Wonderful. So there was a question in the chat asking kind of a fundamental question, or maybe it's an existential question, I'm not sure. Who owns the self-help center? And so, you know, in Illinois, there are a blend of different partnerships that make the self-help centers possible, but I was hoping that the two of you could help me answer this. In most jurisdictions, is there a single owner? Are they more of a point of collaboration? Thoughts on how to answer? I welcome either or both of you to jump in.
Well,
I can just, you start.
I can start. Well, I guess our colleagues in California are very lucky, because their self-help centers and their navigator program actually lives with the court. And so there's court staff who are running that self-help center. They are similarly funded by AmeriCorps, and that grant is actually part of the court is the grantee. And so they're fully encompassed within the court system itself. So that the California courts have full ownership over their self-help centers and their navigator program. In Illinois, we're guests in every single one of our courthouses. So the Illinois Bar Foundation is the AmeriCorps grantee. So all of our members, you know, are tied with our Bar Foundation organization. We have no authority over any of our court partners, but where self-help centers exist are usually tied with the court in some way. So if it's a law library, it's court staff that's providing this help, various ways that's funded. Sometimes there's legal aid staff attorneys who are actually providing assistance through a program of a legal aid organization that might be working. So it can really, it's a real hybrid, I would say, but for the most part, the self-help centers themselves are run by the court, or at least overseen by the court in Illinois. And the Navigator program, we are guests. And so we are a program of a separate agency that partners with the court to operate within the court system itself.
I would just add that very much what Stacey was saying, she pretty much laid it out. I think that the court self-help centers are obviously run by the court staff, and often you have partnerships, as was stated. You see this everywhere. The way to get these programs done is through partnership, whether it's the ATJ Commission weighing in, the court itself, legal aid groups, and the like. So the self-help center may be this place in this space, but it's peopled by individuals from other spaces and places who come in. But always is the case, the court gives it the auspices. The court has to say, yeah, you can come into our court and do this stuff. Whether you're running a nonprofit legal aid group off to the side of the clerk's office, or you're running a full-on, or you're part of, your Navigator program is part of the full court self-help center.
And the only thing I will add, just because of privilege of the moderator, I guess, the Conference of Chief Justices and the Conference of State Court Administrators recently passed a resolution about the importance of non-lawyer navigators and self-help services. And I will dig it out and put it in the chat, or hoping maybe Michelle might be able to help me. But there's been a real push, at least at the national level, among judicial leadership, of the importance of what Stacey and Mary have been working on and doing. So I want to get to recruitment, but let's take a mild detour and get to the end, which is, how do you define success when it comes to a program like this? And have there been examples that help to quantify the benefit that these services provide to the public? So Mary, let's start with you.
Danielle, in our study, we lay out the different data collection tools, the different approaches people have taken to try to make sure they're keeping track of their output data. How many people are served? How are they feeling about how they're served, and the like. So our study lays all that out. But I would say, in the bigger picture, these programs go to the next level and have considerable impact. We sort of laid it out in our study in terms of three groupings. The courts themselves, whether they be staff or judges, and how they operate. Of course, first and foremost, the self-represented litigants and the benefit that may or may not be coming to them. And finally, the navigators themselves. What are these often young people gaining from the experience? And the messages were very clear and loud from our informants. We did not do official evaluations of programs, although some evaluations have been done of the respective programs, and they're mentioned in our study. So that's very important to know. In terms of legal outcomes and the like, we saved this many people from foreclosure. That's the work navigators were doing. Or we helped fill out this many conservatorship filings that were successful, et cetera. But with respect to the courts, I think what we found was court staff saying always, this is leveraging my work. I cannot meet the SRL demand, number one. Number two, the judges and others saying, this increases our court efficiency. How? Because we can actually get more accurate and completed forms, because somebody has looked at the form and made sure, oh, you didn't fill it in here or there. It speeds up the time for the courts. Similarly, for the courts, it brings about more public trust. People use that expression a lot when we talk to them for our study. In other words, the ability to, I'm a person coming in, I don't know what to do, I haven't got a lawyer, and I became satisfied with the process. Maybe I didn't win my case, but I gained what we often call procedural fairness. That's what the SRLs would say. I understood the process better. I felt so much better about my experience in the court. And finally, to close, the third grouping would be the navigators themselves. We found that so many, I think California often talks about this, so many of our navigators are AmeriCorps members and the like who've been navigators, went on to law school. They went on to leadership posts in the whole access to justice system. And very importantly, people get exposed to what's going on in our courts. This doesn't happen very much. So as we bring the navigators in from the outside, they get exposed and they come to learn all the important needs in our respective courts and things that need to be done. So I'd offer those as some of the kinds of things to look for in terms of as you evaluate or as you just take down data on your program if you set up a navigator program. Think about those categories of people.
Wonderful. Well, that was a treasure trove of answers, and it pointed to public trust and confidence and procedural fairness, which are real themes and benefits of navigator programs. So thank you, Mary. There's a question in the chat that's directed at Stacy, but I'm going to ask Mary to think about it too, not as it relates to Illinois, but if you can think of other examples. And the question is, how do navigator programs work in rural areas, and are they effective in rural communities? So Stacy, I'm hoping you can start, but then Mary, if you can think of any other examples, would welcome you to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm happy to weigh in. So outside of Chicago, Illinois is a very rural place, and it's a huge place. So we have really different experiences, you know, in our Chicago-based program versus pretty much everywhere else. And I think that self-help services are even more crucial in rural areas because there are times when access to justice or access to a lawyer or not having a lawyer isn't just because you can't afford one, but maybe there isn't one available to you. So making sure that folks have the tools available to them to be able to represent themselves is really important. A challenge for a program like ours, and I think for some self-help services, is finding that balance between, you know, the supply and demand balance for us. And Danielle wants to talk a little bit about recruitment, but being able to find participants in our program, so a place that is going to be exciting enough and have enough for someone to do all the time to make sure they have a fruitful experience, mixed with, you know, being there when the 1 or 2 people a day might wander in needing assistance. And so there's a fine line, and there's many factors that we're always trying to consider. Something that I think has come out of the pandemic that's been really helpful in Illinois is our required pivot to providing more remote services. I think is really helping meet the needs in rural parts of the state. So I can't take credit for this, but in the last year or so, Illinois has launched Illinois Court Help. It's a hotline and a chat line where anyone in Illinois can get assistance over the phone from navigators who are working remotely and provide information from all around the state. And that was sort of built off of a way that we pivoted just in Cook County, the Chicago area. During the pandemic, we had these ready and willing volunteers who were stuck in their homes and no one was going to the courthouse, but people still had questions. And so we sort of introduced a hotline in Cook County to help people understand Zoom court and what to expect and what was happening with their case and how to access their court records, whatever the questions might have been. And now there's a statewide kind of remote self-help court information hotline, which is very helpful. So I think that these services are crucial in rural populations. Our program has not yet made it to the most rural of places in Illinois. We are most successful where we can find a fine balance between needs in the courthouse and in the community, and also a fruitful recruitment ground for finding participants and providing them with a fruitful experience. So we're in sort of semi-urban places, I think, mostly. But we definitely have a if you build it, they will come mentality in our more rural spaces where it's about being there and being consistent and being present so that when folks do wander in, they're able to get the help that they need.
Danielle, I just add another example of a state like Montana. They have had one of the earliest navigator programs, and we all know what a rural state Montana is. And they have 6 sort of bases around the state. But mainly, as Stacy's suggesting, they work through remote. You can email, you can do it by phone, you can do it on Zoom calls with people. There's a great effort around utilization of remote services as an example in that state. And I think if you can do it there, you can do it many places. I'm from Nebraska originally, and it's rural. It's even more rural than Nebraska is. And I'm telling you, they've had this program underway for at least a decade now. Another place I think of is Kentucky. I was just talking to them the other day. Oh, yes, Mary, we think we're ready to get something going in, one of the major cities, Lexington or something. But, oh, there's a champion out in the western part of the state, a judge who really wants to get a program going, and they're going to make it work. It's very rural. But they have been able to find some local community college person who they're going to try to use, who runs a paralegal program. And so he or she will be able to help recruit some navigators. I think your recruitment is always an issue, even you find that in cities, but there's a lot of incentives you can give college students, community college students and the like to join up and to help. You can give them pro bono credit, or you can give them some kind of credit for doing the work as a navigator. So those are just some thoughts around rural programs.
Super, and I would add, unfortunately, I don't think Paula is going to be able to join us, but the scribing pilot that she was going to talk about is actually in a rural community in New Mexico. It's aimed at trying to meet the needs of limited English proficient court users, as well as low literacy court users. And what they did was they made a court staff position so that they didn't have to deal with volunteer. They repurposed a clerk position to serve as a non-lawyer navigator, which is just another flavor of how you can try it. Okay, so we've circled around recruitment a little bit. This is going to be the last kind of substantive question, and then I'd love to jump to kind of big picture to round us out. So how do you recruit? If you use volunteers like Stacy does, how do you find them? If you use staff, how do you determine, like who are going to be staff supervisors or partners of the program, et cetera? So Stacy, let's start with you. How do you find your AmeriCorps volunteers?
That's a great question, and it is a challenge for programs like ours. I will say that recruitment for AmeriCorps programs across the country are having recruitment challenges overall. I think because of the vast amount of job opportunities that are available, and so folks looking for temporary one-year positions that full-time AmeriCorps members and others can get very modest living allowances, but it's not a salary with benefits that folks might be able to get otherwise. So that aside, and the challenges that might be or might bring, we are year-round recruitment. We are at local colleges planting seeds for folks who might be graduating. We work with a lot of professors in legal services programs or pre-law programs at colleges, so that it's something their students can be thinking about as a great step in between undergrad and law school. And we work with some paralegal programs, especially to get some of our part-time volunteers. But that we are also, I will say that I think something that's a benefit, we sort of have that stereotypical AmeriCorps member, someone taking a gap year, doing a year of service, but we have had people participate in our program from many walks of life, retired folks who are looking to give back in some way to their community, previously stay-at-home parents that are looking to re-enter the workforce and want to dip their toe and have flexibility and something that they can go in and do their work and then go home at night and not have the stress that might come from a different kind of position. So, we're sort of always planting seeds and having conversations. We've been very lucky to have students that have participated in our program. My favorite thing is when someone who did a part-time student experience decides to apply to do a full-time position after they graduate. And in terms of, I will just add to measuring success, a big success for us was that we actually had a fellow who went to law school and who recently joined us as program staff. So she's now a program manager after having participated in the program before going to law school. So that, hopefully means that it was a really meaningful experience and something she wanted to revisit and take on from a new role. So it's an ongoing challenge. It's something we're always doing. It is also, our program design, it's a one-year thing. So we're always on a cycle. We're always sort of starting again. And that's something I would just say around AmeriCorps funding too, keeping in mind the difference, Danielle, you mentioned having court staff and not having to work with volunteers. Volunteers bring their own challenges and joys, but we are always sort of starting fresh and kind of moving through. That means we're retraining, we're reestablishing relationships, and then we coast for a little while, and then we're right back to recruitment again.
All right, last question, because I'm mindful of the time. Any advice for the folks on this webinar about if they want to get started, if they're really motivated, thoughts about how to start a navigator program in their community, or things that you haven't shared that you want as cautionary tales, et cetera?
Well, I'll just make some suggestions, and then Stacy can add many more, I'm sure. I would say that just don't be scared about it. Just get started. There's no per se recipe. There's plenty of people to help. We have a contact list on a website, and that's on the resource page, and a contact list of people to talk to, all sorts of materials that you can share, that you can read and that have been shared there. I think other things to think about are pilot programs. Don't try to do it all at once. Think about what you've got in the here and now in terms of your own infrastructure. Do you already have a self-help center, some place, some base where you could get started? And very importantly, I think, just as I hear this group seems to be doing, try to develop partnerships and find your champions, because champions and partners to do the work with are everything. Because as you can see, there are many facets to these programs. So you just need others to weigh in and help on different pieces. So those are just a couple of thoughts, but I do hope you'll take a peek at, Stacy and I have been leading a working group, and we have a website where there's a lot of material and a contact list, and join, because Stacy's now the chair with Robbie Suthers, and I think you would find it very useful to participate in our working group. And that's alluded to again on your resource page.
Stacy, you want the last word?
Sure, I'll just add, I think Mary's got great advice, is, dipping your toe, and I think conversations like this one to really open it up, and folks who might have skepticism or be afraid of the potential for harm with the unauthorized practice of law, do some educating and ask questions, invite folks to talk to us where we have navigator programs, and where, we started small and we were able to show some success. And pretty soon we've got courthouses knocking on our door saying, how do we get that here? We have all these people who we'd love to help. How can you make our court system run more smoothly? Which is very different than where we were a decade ago, where we were sort of like, hey, we promise this is a good idea. Let's try it.
Wonderful. So I think our resounding advice is just do it. And that you have a treasure trove of resources in Mary and Stacy, who have made a national community of like-minded advocates and practitioners of setting up navigation programs. So you're not alone. I'll turn it back to Michelle. Thank you very much for having us.
So I know we weren't able to get all the questions answered, but we are out of time, and we really, really appreciate everybody joining us. And a really, really big thank you to all of our panelists and our speakers. And we're so grateful that you've given us your knowledge and your time to help us as we work to improve things in Georgia. Gives us a lot to think about. Our next class is going to be December 12th. So we will be advertising that very shortly with some speakers that I think you'll find very interesting. And we're going to continue to do these classes. We'll do 6 over the next year. And so this is number 2. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everyone.